The Dershow.
Trump administration went to the Justice Department, to the courts to try to get warrants against some of the violent advocates on campuses, and they've been turned down. They've been turned down on First Amendment grounds, turned down on the ground that you can advocate violence. You can call for death to the Jews. You can call for genocide against the Jews. That's all protected speech under the First Amendment, and the Trump administration is fighting back on that. In fact, in today's filing, they compared Hamas advocacy on campus to the Ku Klux Klan burning a cross on campus. And of course, politically, they're 100% right. If any Klansman ever came on Columbia's campus or Harvard's campus and burned a flag or put up a symbol of lynching, plainly, that would not be permitted on the campus. Without regard to the First Amendment, because these are private universities, it wouldn't be permitted. But comparable things about Jews are permitted. For example, Black Lives Matter sent around circulated a statement in which it showed and glorified the murderers of Hamas, who were using hang gliders to fly into Israel and murder children, burn them to death and kill them. Black Lives Matter advocate that. For my mind, Black Lives Matter and the Ku Klux Klan are indistinguishable morally, legally, and in almost any other way, except that the Ku Klux Klan is dead and Black Lives Matter has had enormous negative influence in our society. Now, Black lives do matter. So do white lives, so do Jewish lives, so do Muslim lives. All kinds of lives matter, but the organization Black Lives Matter fits into what a philosopher put very well when he said it starts as a cause, then it becomes a movement, then it becomes a business, then it becomes a racket. He left out the last one. Then it becomes the Ku Klux Klan, and that's what happened to Black Lives Matter. So do not support the organization Black Lives Matter. Do not support any organization that advocates bigotry against other groups, whether it's a gay organization, a transgender organization, a feminist organization, Code Pink. Those are all organizations that are big. They're just like the Klan. And many of them advocate violence. Many of them practice violence. And so the justice, when I planned this talk today, this program today, I didn't know that the Justice Department was trying to get search warrants based on claims that these protests, these calls for global intifada are not protected by the First Amendment. Currently, they are protected by the First Amendment, but on this show, I'm going to make a prediction that myself personally, I hope doesn't come true, but I think may well come true, and that is that the Supreme Court may move away from the Brandenburg case, which gives the broadest possible protection of First Amendment rights beyond where any other country in history has ever gone, and moves back a little. We'll talk about that for a minute. Let's just talk about the Brandenburg case for a second. So Brandenburg versus Ohio is a 1969 case in which the Ku Klux Klan, Mr. Brandenburg, who was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, got up and made a speech, and he called for, and he couldn't speak English. I mean, he's American, but he was an ignoramus. He called for revengeance against Jews and African Americans. The good old days when Jews and African Americans were united. They were united only because they were both victims and targets of the Ku Klux Klan. But he made that speech. It was a general speech. And there was an Ohio statute that punished, quote, the advocacy of the duty, necessity, or propriety of crime or violence as a means of accomplishing industrial or political reform. And he was sentenced to prison and a $1,000 fine. And the Supreme Court reversed the decision and came up with a new, expanded definition of what's covered by the First Amendment. The government cannot punish speech unless it meets two criteria. First, it has to be, quote, directed at inciting or producing imminent lawless action. And second, it is likely to incite or produce such action. So the purpose, the intent has to be to produce imminent lawless action. So the question is globalize the Intifada, genocide against the Jews. Are those intended? Are those directed at inciting or producing imminent lawless action? And are those kinds of statements likely to incite or produce such action? Very hard standard to meet. Generally, it's been defined to mean only face-to-face. You're in front of a crowd and you tell them to do something. I had a case like that back in the 1970s. My client was a professor at Stanford University, and he made a speech against the Vietnam War to students. And he said to the students, it would be a good idea if you were to take over the computation center. And then the students immediately after hearing the speech, went and took over the computation center. And so the question was that a call for imminent lawless action? Taking over the computation center was lawless. It wasn't violent, but it was lawless. And they did it immediately. And the case didn't go to court. It was handled by the Stanford University administrative whatever. And a young lawyer named Joel Klein ultimately became the head of education in New York and many prominent positions in Democratic administrations. He and I, he was my research assistant, represented pro bono Bruce Franklin, the professor who made those statements, and we lost. Stanford fired him. First time in modern history that a major university like Stanford fired a professor for his free speech. Now, what was going on at Stanford was an organization then called the Venceremos, We Shall Overcome, We Shall Conquer. And they were firing bullets into the homes of faculty members. And so the faculty members who served on the committee weren't quite thrilled about the Venceremos or about their colleague, Bruce Franklin. And so he lost. The case was then settled. And he moved from Stanford to Rutgers, where he continued in his distinguished career as a Maoist, Stalinist, literary critic. I didn't like the guy at all. He didn't like me, but I was defending him on behalf of the First Amendment. And so the question for today's discussion is whether the Brandenburg principle that requires, as I said, that the speech be directed at inciting or producing imminent lawless action, and that it's likely to produce such imminent lawless action, whether that standard will be preserved or whether the Supreme Court, that was a 9-0 decision back in the day, whether the Supreme Court will move in a different direction and say it doesn't have to be that imminent. It could be relatively certain, but it doesn't have to be today. But there has to be a causal relationship between what's being advocated and what's being done.